On STP today, we're talking the movie Unbroken, the story of Olympic athlete, a runner named Louis Zamperini, who was captured by the Japanese in World War II. Angelina Jolie directed this film that was a massive success in its day. But the story of Louis Zamperini didn't end at the end of this film. And we're going to talk about that and more on STP today.
Welcome to Shattered the Podcast,
sharing the lived experience of mental illness on
A father,
a mother.
a family.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
So imagine you're an Olympic athlete. You reach the pinnacle of your Olympic career, and then war comes. You become a bomber pilot, and one day you're flying over the Pacific, your plane crashes, and you become a POW, a prisoner of war. When his plane goes down and he survives an incredible ordeal on the waves, Louis Zamperini's trial was not over. When captured by the Japanese, his fame had preceded him. And one particular captor, and I will not name this guy, I don't believe his name needs to be mentioned, is especially cruel to Louis. Targets him specifically for extra beatings, extra torments, extra humiliation. The film is a powerful testimony to the fact that Louis was an extraordinary dude. The things he survived through, his courage, his moral courage, his physical courage is undoubted. But there's a question I've always asked about these prisoners of war at the end of World War II is, why did they not seek retribution? Why did they not turn on their captors? There's a lot of reasons for this. Very much so, it was because the captors often took off. And such is the case in Louis' story, in that the Japanese soldier who ritually humiliated, beat, and tortured Louis, as soon as he found out the war was ended, he disappeared. He hid, like the coward he was. Now, in the movie, we see some of Louis' triumphs, winning races, being forced to race against Japanese athletes when he'd been starved and tortured, and then lined up next to another Japanese athlete and told to race him. He once gave a talk on Japanese radio. Got him some good food for a couple of days. Let people know that he was alive. But then they wanted him to make another one, and he wouldn't. When he wouldn't do that, he got sent back to the POW camp where this barbarous torturer made every man in the prison camp punch him. And if they didn't punch him hard, they would be beaten and tortured themselves. Stuff that this guy went through is mind-boggling. And it brings to question the comparing of mental illness. A lot of people will hear a story, even I do it. I'll be at a school, I'll be telling my story, and I'll hear somebody else's story. And I'll often go, wow, their story is so much worse than mine. What am I doing here? I say it often here that you cannot compare pain. Pain is pain, especially when it comes to mental illness, because each person's pain is individually designed to make the sufferer suffer to the fullest extent. In the movie Unbroken, Louis does something interesting in the final scenes. When the war is over, he goes and tries to find the dude that had tortured him. Doesn't really take a genius to figure out what he wanted to do to him. But Louis' war was not over. There's a second part to that movie that is told in a fairly okay film. It's told in the last sort of 3 minutes of the film during the credits, just before the credits, about Louis' life after World War II. Like every Allied serviceman, the end of the war was a time of quiet celebration. I've read many, many stories about how the end of the war was generally greeted with a quiet, kind of reserved satisfaction, but also it seems like dudes look back on it and they wonder what it was all for. In World War II, that answer was a lot easier to understand. As soon as they found the prisoner of war camps, as soon as they found the concentration camps, they knew what they were fighting for. So World War II ends, and Louis Zamperini is going to go home. He's going to pick up his life. He's going to start again. Problem is that the torture, the humiliations didn't end at the same time that the armistice was signed. He came home a broken, a bitter man, despite the film's title of Unbroken, living with the haunting of his tortures, fell into alcoholism, massive depression. Still kind of called it shell shock, war weariness, not understanding that PTSD was more powerful than they can possibly imagine, more devastating. Louis comes home and I kind of feel like revenge was all that he had. Anger, bitterness. The guy that tortured him was never found. Apparently, he was one of the top 40 war criminals of in Japan, but he lived a quiet life, a happy life after the war. What would Louis have done if he had have met his torturer? The thing of it was that Louis managed to get the help he needed. Louis broke the cycle of PTSD and alcoholism through marriage and through faith. Louis wanted to meet his captor, not for revenge, not to ask why, but to tell him that he forgave him. Could you imagine that? Imagine going to the person who tortured you, humiliated you, damaged you, telling them that you forgive them. I think about my assailant and you think, could I ever forgive him? I don't know. Clearly, I'm not of the caliber of Louis Zamperini. Louis just wanted to meet the guy to tell him that it was okay. He didn't hate him. That kind of courage is more than extraordinary. It's I mean, it's unfathomable. It's just like, how could you possibly? When it comes to mental illness, we've all been through our own torture, our own places where things have been unfair and unkind. But to move forward beyond that pain takes courage. Even if it doesn't feel like courage, it does. Because it's so easy to give up. It's so easy to quit. I would never compare myself to Louis in any way, shape, or form. But I hope that one day I have an nth millimeter, a squidge of his courage. It's an impressive film, and if you haven't seen it, you should. It's called Unbroken, story of Louis Zamperini, a POW during World War II. Incredible story of somebody that managed to overcome most horrific circumstance you could ever imagine. And if that isn't an inspiration to everybody with mental illness, I don't know what would be. Hey, we'll be back tomorrow with our 8th or 9th film for the 11th of the 11th. Been enjoying this. This has been great. I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to Shattered the podcast. I'd like to thank our producer, Meredith Brosnan, our executive producer, Torian Lau, and the band Adelaide for allowing us to use their song as our theme. Go to shatteredthepodcast.com for more information.